Hello and welcome to another episode of our series TimeXtender Tuesdays. My name is Frank, I'm a solution specialist here at TimeXtender, and today we want to talk about a topic that many of you have requested, and that is calculation groups. So if you remember, in the last episode we have talked about the curvature of space-time and the relativity of time and so on, but obviously that was just a segue to the actual topic, time intelligence. We have looked at some very common examples of how, using techniques of time intelligence, you would be able to pre-calculate your measures for certain time frames, and in which ways this would be very beneficial for the users of your tabular model, of your semantic layer, and also how you could use this in your actual dashboards and how you would implement it using TimeXtender and your semantic layer with Power BI or analysis services. So you remember those from the last episodes. We have looked at year to date, same period, last year, year over year, and so on. But what happens if you are building actual real world big semantic models with maybe many fact tables, a lot of measures, and then you introduce the concept of time intelligence? Because guess what? It will be tremendously useful and your users will want to adopt it. And so this can grow quickly. Let's look at one practical example of what would happen then. Let's say you have 5 fact tables in your model, and each of these fact tables has 5 base measures in it. That already adds up to 25 measures that you need to manage. And now you introduce time intelligence, time calculations to your model. And if you do it the way we did in the last episode, you will end up in this simple example with already 250 measures that you need to manage manually. And not only do you need to add them manually, but also imagine if you later on want to modify one particular time intelligence calculation, like the running total or the rolling 12 months or something like that, then you will end up with a lot of measures that you need to alter. And this is not even an exaggeration. I remember one project pretty well in which time intelligence played a huge role, and the base model was already pretty big. So we had like 20 fact tables with 10 base measures in it, and then we added a lot of time intelligence to the mix. So we ended up with something like 1,500 measures in the model overall, and that of course is just not practical anymore to do it in a manual way. The challenge we want to tackle today is how can we implement time intelligence in a way that we don't have to repeat the same formulas over and over again. The code is in one place, is kept in one place, and is available for all the measures in our model. And so users have it available, but from the management and implementation perspective, it still is feasible to add this to our model, even in a larger one. One versatile and very powerful way to do this is the so-called calculation groups that have been added some time ago to Power BI. You can do many things with the calculation groups, and we will just use time intelligence as one example of how they can be useful to your overall projects. And they will enable us to have all of the code, the formulas, in one place. That of course means less code to manage, less snippets to manage, less errors, and future-proofing for changes that will certainly come our way down the road. But before we switch over to today's demo, we need to talk a bit about the architecture of what we're going to build today, because it will have one or two tools in the mix that we will need besides TimeXtender to get all of this working. This is what we're going to build. Let's start from the left-hand side. Over here you can see we have a modern data warehouse, nothing new there, all the business data in there, modeled in a nice star schema. Then we have a semantic model with a tabular endpoint managed within TimeXtender, and we will add our base measures in this model. The cube will be deployed to Azure Analysis Services. And now comes the new part. We will create another tabular model on top of the first model. We will use Power BI Desktop and the Tabular Editor to create the model and also a report that goes along with it. This model will contain the time intelligence calculations in a calculation group, and it will have a direct query connection to our initial model. I noted here 2 asterisks because the direct query on tabular models is currently only available for datasets that are deployed to Power BI service, and that is why I included this icon here in the architecture chart as well. On top of this model, which will basically be empty but only be a container to have the time intelligence and the calculation groups in there, you can then again, of course, have your dashboards, which will have a live connection to this data set. And you will build these the way you already know it in Power BI Desktop or even on the web interface. And to make sure everybody is on the same page when I'm talking about these models, let's give them a name. The first one, which is managed in TimeXtender, which will contain the actual data and which will live on Azure Analysis Services together with the base models. That one we will call the base model. And the model we built on top of it that will contain the time intelligence logic in a calculation group that will be designed in Power BI Desktop and Tabular Editor and will be deployed to the Power BI service, that we will call the secondary model, just so we have some common naming for these models during the upcoming demo. Let's talk a bit about the Tabular Editor because maybe you're not familiar with it yet. First of all, what is the Tabular Editor? Well, it says on the website, it is a free and open source tool that lets you easily manipulate tabular models. So it gives basically to developers and everybody creating tabular models a lot of productivity features to edit and manage models very quickly and efficiently and even do changes in bulk. So basically it's a productivity booster for working with tabular models. We will be using the version number 2 and that is free and open source. There's also a paid version with even more features which is called Tabular Editor number 3 or version 3. Check it out over on tabulareditor.com. Also shout out to Daniel, the creator of the tool. It's just an amazing tool and very popular in the community. And besides that, it is, like TimeXtender, another beautiful Danish software product. Now, with the architecture and the tools out of the way, let's recap the steps that we will see and do during our demo to get all of this done. First, we will deploy the semantic base model to Azure Analysis Services using TimeXtender. That step you're probably already familiar with. Then we will create a new Power BI PBIX file with a live connection to this set base model. In that file, we will change the connection from live connection to direct query. And this change of connection will actually create the secondary tabular model. To this model in turn, we can connect with the Tabular Editor and use it to implement the calculation groups, the time calculations in there, to have the time intelligence in the model. We can also then build a small report right within Power BI Desktop on top of that model. And as the last step, we can deploy the secondary model to the Power BI service and see it all in action. That was quite a bit of prep work, but I think it was worth it and it should make it very easy for you to follow along because you know exactly what we're going to do. So now it's time for a demo. Let's jump over. Okay, so this is our TimeXtender project that we will use to go through our example for today. As I have mentioned, over here we have our modern data warehouse that you are already familiar with all the tables and also 2 fact tables. And then we have one semantic layer that is called, in this case, calculation groups base model. And I have opened it up over here. So as you can see, it has one fact table over here, another fact table over here, and then we have our date table because we will need it for the time intelligence. Of course, in a real life scenario, you would add additional fact tables, additional dimension tables, and all of that. But to illustrate why it is so useful later on to have the calculation groups for something like time intelligence, I added some base measures to show you how quickly the amount of measures would really explode or could really explode depending on your use case if you have a couple of fact tables and then you add time intelligence and you have the base measures in here. So each fact table has already 5 to 6 base measures. That's already 10, and then we do time intelligence on top, so you end up with tens and hundreds and even thousands of measures, etc. So this is a very good example. And as you can see, it has an endpoint, and it is a regular Azure Analysis Services endpoint. It will just go to one particular Azure Analysis Services instance that I have predefined. Okay, that sounds good. So let's just deploy and execute. Okay, this didn't take too long. So now we have our model deployed and executed. Now the next step is to create a new PBIX file in Power BI Desktop. So let me open up Power BI Desktop and we can go straight to get data. So now what we want to do is we want to get data from Azure Analysis Services, and we can select connect. Just paste in here the server name, confirm with OK, and make sure to have connect live selected, but it's the default. So in this case, we want to connect to the base model, and here we can see this is our semantic layer that we created in TimeXtender calculation groups base model. So that we want to do, connect to that cube. And now it will say live connection connected, and it will give us an option, make changes to this model. And that is what we want to do. So let's select this one. Now it will say a direct query connection is required. And remember, when we looked at the architecture chart, from the base model to the secondary model, there will be a direct query. And this is required to have a secondary model in which we can implement the calculation groups. For that reason, we will add a local model, or like we called it before, the secondary model. Now it becomes really interesting because if you have a very large model, the secondary model could be only a subset of the tables. In our case, I will just select everything and also check include tables added later as well. Let's confirm this with submit. And then you will see it went from live connection to storage mode direct query down here. At first glance, not many things have changed. We still have the purchase transaction and the sales transactions fact table, and we have the date dimension here. So let's first build a couple of visuals here. In our previous approach, if we now wanted to have year-to-date or any other time intelligence measures, we would just go ahead and add them directly to the fact table. In this case, we don't want to do this because we want to use calculation groups for it. So Tabular Editor is already installed on this machine. You can just download it, install it, and once you have done that, it will automatically give you a new option here in Power BI Desktop. If I just go here now to External Tools, it will give me a new button that is called Tabular Editor, and you can see the icon of Tabular Editor. And if I just click that, it will do two things. It will open Tabular Editor up, and it will also connect it directly to the new secondary model that we have just created. So let's make this a bit bigger. The way Tabular Editor works, it always has like this object tree on the left-hand side. The thing we are interested in today is the tables section. Again, if I open this, it will give us our three tables, the date dimension, the purchase transaction, and the sales transactions. And you can see all of those are direct query over analysis services. If we open up the sales transaction, you can see also here are the measures. So now we have all the preparations done. What we can do now is add our calculation group. And in order to do that, I can just right click on the tables, say create new, and the only not grayed out option is even calculation group. So I can just add that, and I will call it time intelligence. You see it gets a special icon and it will say calculation group table. If I open it up, it will have two things in here. The one is name, and you will see what this is good for later, but just to make it very clear, this will be our time calculation. And then we have the calculation items. And this is the place where we will now paste in and include the actual time intelligence logic. So let's do that. We add a new calculation item, that's what it's called. And let's say we want this to be the year to date. If you remember from the last time, the measure code looked something like this. For the year to date calculation, we can use the total YTD DEX function. Then we reference our base measure, and then we reference also the date dimension along which the aggregation should occur. This worked very well for defining individual time intelligence measures, but in this case, of course, we want to do it generically. So we want to define this logic one time and make it applicable to each and every measure in the whole tabular model. So we need to get rid of the base measure in our calculation here in our DAX formula, but instead we need to make it generic so that Power BI will know where to insert the measure that we actually want to have calculated. And for that particular reason, there's another DAX function that was introduced with the feature of the calculation groups. So we can just remove our base measure here and include one DAX formula, and that is called selected measure. Parentheses. And basically that is all. What will happen now is whenever we use this calculation item YTD, it only works together with one of our base measures, and Power BI will replace the selected measure keyword with the actual base measure that we will apply the time intelligence to. So let's do maybe another two examples. Let's add another calculation item, same period last year. The code for it looked like this. And also we need to replace our base measure with selected measure. And let's also do a more complicated one, which is the running total. What you can also do is add another one and call that actual. That will give us the actual number, the actual measure without any time intelligence applied. Now I will press the save button up here, and this will now save it to the in-model memory that is running in Power BI desktop. Switching back, it will give us a message up here. One or more calculation groups needs to be manually refreshed, and we will do that. Refresh now. And now you can see that we have a new item here in our field section. It is called time intelligence. And if I open it up, it will give us the name of time calculation. And what we can do now in order to look at the sales amount using our time intelligence calculation group, we can just drag and drop it on the columns, for example. And you will notice it behaves very much like a dimension table. And now we can see in the first column, we have our actuals, so the actual measure value, 1 million, 3.4 million, 3.5 million. The next one will give us the running total, and it behaves exactly the way that we did it last time manually, 1 million, 4.4, etc. So running up the total even across years. Next we have the same period last year. So the 1 million is in January 2020, but the actual is in January 2019. And year to date looks very much like running total, but only in the first year, because it will reset when we cross from December over to January of the next year. So our calculations work very well, and we have not added a single measure to the model. And of course also they will work in a chart, and usually what you do in a chart is you would use them as a visual filter. So let's grab our time intelligence and just drop it on the visual filters, and let's say we want to have the year-to-date time intelligence. Note how if nothing is selected, that means you will always still get the actual, so the actual measure is calculated and no time intelligence is applied. But when I now select the year-to-date, you can see how, for example, the sales amount keeps growing, and you can also see that the number of customers measure is changing, and it does also reset from December to January of the next year. So in this way you can see we have defined the logic for the time intelligence and the measures one time in one place, but now we can use it on all the measures of the model with the benefit of not having to manage so many measures and with the additional benefit of having the logic of the actual time intelligence defined in just one place. And because it behaves like a dimension table, you can also switch easily between different time intelligence calculations within the same visual now. So let's say instead of year to date, I want to see the running total. It's just a matter of selecting the other time calculation. And you can even include this now in slicers and all of the good stuff you can do with regular dimensions as well. Let's have a look at our last step, and that is to deploy the secondary model. If we want to do that, all you need to do from Power BI Desktop is hit Publish, select your workspace. In this case, I will just use my workspace, and it will be uploaded to Power BI. This will not take away much of your resources as the model is basically empty. And if we follow the link, we will be taken to the report with all the numbers in place. And in here, we can change again the time calculation to year to date. That was one example of how you can make use of calculation groups in Power BI. In this case, we implemented time intelligence. As we mentioned before, you can also use calculation groups for many other things. We hope this will spark a lot of ideas on your side. Please let us know if that was helpful for you. Also, give us any additional questions or ideas that you have. Thanks for your time. That is all for today. We hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next episode.